That letter was written for my son. The words came out of Dorothea Kincaid's mouth like something that had been rehearsed, practiced in front of a mirror until they had no warmth left in them at all. The dining room of the Kincaid estate went silent, not the polite silence of a formal dinner where guests pause between courses. This was the kind of silence that falls when something irreversible has just been said in front of witnesses. Nora Vance stood at the far end of the long mahogany table, still holding the envelope. Her fingers had gone cold around it. The paper was ivory thick, the kind of stationery that cost more than her monthly grocery bill before she had married into this family. Her name was written on the front in her late father-in-law's handwriting. Not her husband's name, not the estate's name. Her name Nora. She had found it that morning, tucked beneath a stack of documents in Henry Kincaid's study. The lawyers had cleared the room after the reading of the will, but one drawer had been left behind, and inside it, the envelope had been sitting as if it had been placed there deliberately, as if it had been waiting. She had not opened it yet. Dorothea Kincaid had taken one look at the envelope in Nora's hand and crossed the room in 4 steps, her heel sharp against the marble floor. "Give that to me." Nora did not move. "It has my name on it." Dorothea's hand stayed extended. Her diamond rings caught the light from the chandelier above them. She was 71 years old and she had spent every one of those years in rooms exactly like this one. Rooms where people did what she asked because she gave them no alternative. "My husband was not well in his final months," Dorothea said. "Whatever he wrote, he was confused. The letter is not valid." Nora looked down at the envelope, then she looked up. "You haven't read it." "I don't need to." The rest of the family sat frozen at the table. Nora's husband Graham Vance had risen from his chair but had not walked toward her. He stood with one hand resting on the back of his seat, his face doing the thing it always did when his mother entered a room, going carefully, deliberately neutral. His sister Penelope sat with her water glass raised halfway to her mouth watching. The family lawyer, a thin man named Aldous Briggs, had set down his pen. Nora had been part of this family for 7 years. Long enough to know what happened when Dorothea Kincaid decided something was over. Long enough to know that her mother-in-law never raised her voice, because she had never needed to. "Nora," Graham said from across the table, his voice was careful. "It has my name on it," Nora said again. Quietly, she was not performing calm. She was just holding onto it with both hands, the way she used to hold onto the railing of her mother's porch steps during winter, when the wood was slick and the ground below was very far down. Dorothea lowered her hand, but her eyes did not move. Henry had many attachments in his later years. Sentimentality. You know how the ill become. She turned slightly toward Aldous. Whatever personal correspondence was left in that study should have been collected and returned to the family. Aldous cleared his throat. "Technically, Mrs. Kincaid, if the letter is addressed to." "Thank you, Aldous." He closed his mouth. Penelope put her water glass down. She was watching her mother with an expression Nora had never seen on her face before. Not agreement, not the usual smooth alignment, something closer to discomfort. Nora set the envelope on the table in front of her, not because she was giving it up, because her hands were shaking and she did not want anyone to see. Henry Kincaid had died 6 weeks ago. Quietly in the room at the end of the east wing, with a hospice nurse on one side and a window that looked out over the back garden on the other, Nora had sat with him on his last 3 nights, reading aloud from the novels he had loved as a young man. He had called her his favorite reader. He had called her other things too, things that had made her feel, for the first time in 7 years of marriage into this family, that someone here truly saw her. She had not expected a letter. She had not expected anything. Which was, she understood now, exactly the point. Dorothea Kincaid had built her family's expectations with the same precision she had built everything else. You received what you were meant to receive. You stood where you were meant to stand. You did not find things in drawers. "Open it." The voice came from the far end of the table. Everyone turned. Penelope was looking at Nora, not at her mother. Dorothea stiffened. "Penelope, he wrote her name on it," Penelope said. She sounded almost surprised by her own words. "It's her letter." The silence shifted. Nora felt it, a slight tilting of the room like a boat correcting after a wave. Dorothea turned to her daughter. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "This is not the moment." "Then when is?" Penelope asked. She still wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking at the envelope on the table. "He's been gone 6 weeks. We've done the service, the reading, the dinners. When does Nora get to know what her father-in-law left her?" Graham sat down slowly. His face was still neutral, but something moved beneath it. A muscle in his jaw. Dorothea looked at Nora. "That letter contains private family matters." "Then it's addressed to the wrong person," Nora said. The table did not breathe. Dorothea's eyes narrowed by a fraction. Just a fraction. The most she ever allowed herself in company. Nora's throat was dry. She was not brave. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She was terrified. She had been terrified of this woman since the first Sunday dinner she had attended as Graham's girlfriend. When Dorothea had looked her up and down with the slow patience of someone pricing a painting, and found the number disappointing. But Henry had written her name, and he had been the only person in this house who had ever said it without calculation. She picked up the envelope. Graham's voice was low. She looked at him. 7 years of marriage. A man she had loved, still loved, though that love had become something quieter and more complicated than she had expected. A man who looked at her now the way he always looked at her when his mother was in the room, with apology already built into his expression, offered in advance, because the apology was easier than the action. She opened the letter. The paper inside was folded twice. She unfolded it carefully. Henry's handwriting was still clear, still firm, the handwriting of a man who had spent decades signing documents that moved money and property across the country. But between the lines she could feel the effort it had taken. The pen had pressed harder in some places. The letters were slightly uneven. He had written it when he was already very ill. Nora read the first line, then the second. Then she stopped. The room was watching her. She read it again to make sure she had not misunderstood. Nora, there is something I should have told you long before this. I am sorry that it took dying to make me brave enough. Her breath caught. Dorothea saw her face change. What does it say? Nora did not answer. She read the third line. The woman you were named for. Your mother, Sylvie Marchand. She was known to our family long before you married Graham. She worked for us here in the summers of the late 1980s. She was kind and talented and my son Charles loved her. I was too afraid of my wife to say so. Nora set the letter flat on the table. The room tilted again harder this time. Charles Kincaid had been Graham's older brother. He had died in a car accident when Nora was still in university. She had seen photographs, heard stories from Graham. She looked at Dorothea now. Dorothea's face had not changed. Not one visible degree. But her hands clasped on the table in front of her had tightened. What does it say? Dorothea repeated. Not a question this time. Nora's voice was steady. She was surprised by it. He says my mother worked here. The room seemed to compress. He says Charles loved her. Penelope made a sound, small, involuntary. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Graham was still. The careful neutrality on his face had cracked, not into emotion, not yet into confusion. He was trying to find the shape of what was being said. Dorothea said, your mother was a housekeeper, each word precise. She was employed here for 2 summers. That is the extent of the connection. Henry was ill. He wrote this before the hospice. Nora turned the letter over. The date was there, clear, 14 months ago. 14 months before he died. Dorothea's jaw shifted, barely perceptibly. You cannot possibly believe. I don't know what to believe, Nora said. That's the point. She looked down at the letter. He says there's more. He says he kept something. For me, silence. Then Penelope said very quietly, there's a box. Everyone looked at her. Penelope's face had gone the color of the white tablecloth. She looked as though she had said something she had been holding in for a very long time, and the relief of saying it and the terror of it were arriving in her body at the same time. Penelope. Dorothea's voice was a door closing. I knew about it, Penelope said. She was talking to Nora now, only to Nora. Dad showed me 3 years ago. He said it was yours. He said he was going to tell you, but then the diagnosis came and then, her voice broke at the edge. He made me promise not to tell Mum. The chandelier light fell evenly over all of them. The plates from dinner had been cleared. The wine sat in glasses no one was touching. Graham had both hands flat on the table now. Dorothea did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. But the quality of her silence changed in a way that filled every corner of the room. Penelope, she said. What did your father show you? It was not a question either. Penelope looked at her mother. And something happened in that look that Nora could not entirely name. The deference was still there. It was built deep. But underneath it very slowly something was surfacing. Letters, Penelope said. From Charles. To Sylvie Marchand. And something she sent back. She swallowed. A photograph. Nora's hands pressed flat on the table. A photograph of her mother in this house. With Charles Kincaid. Graham finally spoke. What are you saying, Pen? His voice was low. He already knew what she was saying. He was asking it anyway. The way people ask questions they already know the answer to when they need a few more seconds before everything changes. Penelope looked at her brother. I'm saying Dad thought Nora was Charles's daughter. The chandelier didn't move. The candles on the sideboard didn't flicker. Everything in the room stayed exactly where it was, and yet somehow the geometry of it had shifted so profoundly that Nora felt as though she was standing at a different angle to the floor. Charles Kincaid's daughter. Her mother, Sylvie Marchand, who had worked here 2 summers, who had never talked about those summers, who had said only once, when Nora had asked where she had met Nora's father, some doors are better left closed, sweetheart. Some rooms are better left empty. Who had raised Nora alone in a small house in Gatineau. Who had taken in sewing work and cleaned offices and taught piano to neighborhood children on a second-hand upright. Who had put Nora through school with a quiet, ferocious determination and had never, not once, suggested that the money for it had come from anywhere other than her own 2 hands. Who had died when Nora was 26, before Nora had met Graham, before Nora had ever heard the name Kincaid. Nora looked at Dorothea. Dorothea looked back at her. The stillness between them was enormous. Did you know? Nora said. Dorothea did not answer. Did you know who my mother was when Graham brought me home? Dorothea's hands were still folded. Still perfectly. Still, I had a suspicion, she said finally. Graham's chair scraped back from the table. Mother. His voice had lost all the careful neutrality. You had a suspicion. Dorothea looked at her son. For the first time that evening, something human moved through her expression. Something that was not composed. Not controlled. I could not be certain, she said. For 7 years. Graham was standing now. She has been in this family for 7 years. I cannot be certain, Dorothea said again. As though certainty were the only standard by which any of this could be judged. As though 49% probability absolved a person of everything. Nora felt very far away from herself. She looked at the letter in her hands, at Henry's careful, effortful writing. I was too afraid of my wife to say so. He had known. He had known, and he had kept it in a drawer, kept it in a box, kept it buried under the weight of a woman who had spent 7 decades deciding what the family's story would be. But he had written Nora's name on an envelope. He had dated it 14 months before he died. He had been afraid, but he had written it anyway. She thought of Henry in his chair by the window in the east wing, the novels open on his lap. The garden he could no longer walk in, visible through the glass. He had called her his favorite reader. He had said it with a warmth that she had found strange, even embarrassing. Because she had not understood it then. She understood it now. He had been looking at his son's daughter. Where is the box? Nora said. She was not asking anyone in particular. She was asking the room, but it was Penelope who answered. Study. Back panel, left side of the fireplace. There's a lever. Dorothea rose from her chair. Penelope, that is enough. No, Penelope's voice came out louder than she had intended. She pulled it back slightly but did not take it back entirely. No, Mum, I watched Dad sit with this for 3 years. I watched him try to figure out how to tell her. I watched you shut down every conversation where her mother's name came up for 7 years. I watched you look at Nora at Christmas dinner and at Easter and at every Sunday we've spent in this house and say nothing. She was breathing hard. I'm not doing it anymore. Dorothea looked at her daughter. That was the terrible thing about it. It was not unkind, it was simply closed. This family has survived difficult things, Dorothea said. We survived them by making other people carry them, Penelope said. No one moved. Nora pushed back her chair. Graham took 1 step toward her. She looked at him and he stopped. Not because she was angry with him, because she needed to do the next part herself. She walked out of the dining room. Her heels sounded too loud in the hallway. The house was enormous. The way all houses in this family were enormous. The way everything in this family was designed to make you feel small by comparison. She had never gotten used to it. She had spent 7 years trying to. The study was dark when she pushed the door open. She found the light switch by memory. Henry's desk was still there. The lawyers had taken the documents but left the furniture, left the smell of old paper and the particular cold that gathered in rooms where someone used to live. She stood for a moment in the doorway before she walked to the fireplace. Left side, back panel. She pressed her hand along the wood until she felt the slight give of a lever, a mechanism so old it had probably been there since the house was built. She pressed it, a panel swung out silently. Inside on a small shelf was a wooden box. Simple, no ornament. Her name was written on a piece of paper taped to the lid, in the same handwriting as the letter. She carried it to the desk and sat down in Henry's chair. She sat there for a long time with the box in her hands before she opened it. Inside was a stack of letters, bound with a ribbon that had faded from green to gray. There were maybe 30 of them. On top of the letters was a photograph, black and white, printed on the kind of paper that belonged to a different era. 2 young people sitting on the back steps of what she recognized, after a moment, as this house, though it was younger in the photograph, less imposing, with a garden behind it that had not yet grown into the formal rose it held now. The young man was Charles Kincaid. She recognized him from the photographs in Graham's study. The young woman was her mother. Sylvie Marchand was 23 years old in this photograph, laughing at something off camera, her hair loose, one hand resting in Charles's. She looked like herself. She looked like herself in a way that no photograph Nora had ever seen of her mother had looked, open and unguarded and entirely unaware that the world she was sitting in the middle of was about to close its doors on her. Nora sat very still. She had her mother's eyes. She had always known that. People had told her since she was small. But she had never seen her mother's face at this age, had never seen her this young. And in the photograph, sitting on those steps, Sylvie Marchand looked so much like Nora at 33, that the resemblance struck her chest like something physical. She was in this house because her mother had been in this house. She had married into this family because her father had been part of this family. She had sat at that dining room table for 7 years across from a woman who had looked at her and known, or suspected, or feared, and had said nothing. She opened the first letter. It was in Charles's handwriting, addressed to Sylvie, my Sylvie. The date was the summer of 1988. She did not read the whole thing. She read enough. She read until the door of the study opened and someone came in. It was not Graham. It was not Penelope. It was Dorothea Kincaid, alone, without the armor of the dining room and the chandelier, and the full family assembled like a court. Dorothea stood in the doorway. She looked at the box. She looked at the photograph in Nora's hand. Then she looked at her daughter-in-law, who was also very possibly something else entirely. She sat down in the chair across the desk. She sat the way old women sit when they are very tired, without ceremony, without arrangement. Nora waited. Charles told me, Dorothea said. That summer. He said he loved her. He said he was going to. She stopped. Started again differently. I was 38 years old. I had built this family. I had done everything right. The right marriage, the right house, the right schools for the children, the right charities, the right donations. I had worked very hard to make sure none of it could be taken apart. Her voice was measured, almost colorless. And then my son came to me and said he was in love with the summer housekeeper. Nora said nothing. I told him it would ruin him, Dorothea said. That is what I told him. I said it would cost him everything, his inheritance, his place in the firm, the life I had spent 38 years building for him. She looked down at her hands. He was 22. He believed me. Nora's throat tightened. Your mother was given 2 months' wages and a reference letter, Dorothea said. I arranged it myself. I told Charles she had taken another position in Toronto, that she had not left a forwarding address. She paused. He looked for her. For 3 years. Henry helped him quietly, but I had been careful. Nora thought of her mother's face. The particular quality of her mother's silences when the subject turned to the past. He never knew about me, Nora said. Not a question. Dorothea's hands were very still. No. By the time Henry began to suspect, Charles was already gone. She looked up. The accident was 8 years later. A car accident on a highway north of Montreal in November. Graham had told her once briefly that it was the thing that had changed their family most. That afterward his mother had become someone different. Harder, but also somehow more breakable. Nora looked at the photograph. Her mother, laughing, 23 years old, not yet knowing that the door was about to be closed. You knew who I was, Nora said, when Graham brought me home. Dorothea was quiet for a moment. I knew your surname, Vance. I knew your mother's name was Sylvie. A pause. When I saw Sylvie's face. She stopped. What? Nora said. Dorothea looked at her directly, for the first time without any instrument between them. You look exactly like him, she said. You always have. The study was very quiet. Somewhere in the house Nora could hear the distant sound of Penelope's voice, Graham's answer. The ordinary sounds of a family trying to put itself back together or decide that it couldn't. For 7 years, Nora said. I sat across from you at every dinner and you looked at me and saw your son. Dorothea did not deny it. And you said nothing. I told myself it was not certain. Dorothea said. Her voice was even. But beneath the evenness, Nora could hear it. The terrible weight of a person who has carried something for a very long time and has mistaken the weight for strength. That is not a reason, Nora said. That is a comfort you gave yourself. Dorothea looked away toward the window and the dark garden beyond it. Nora set the photograph down on the desk between them. Gently. Not as a weapon. As an object that deserved to be treated carefully. My mother raised me alone, she said. She took in sewing, she taught piano. She never once suggested that she had been owed anything by anyone. She never spoke badly about anyone from that time. I asked her once when I was maybe 16 whether she missed my father, she said. Nora's voice caught. She held it. She said some people deserve to be remembered only in the best possible way, and that she was lucky to have had even a small piece of time with someone like that. Dorothea closed her eyes. She was talking about Charles, Nora said. I understand that now. She spent her whole life protecting the memory of a man who had no idea she needed protecting. The silence between them was different from the silence in the dining room. It did not have an audience. It did not have the weight of performance. It was just two women in a study where an old man had kept secrets in a wooden box, and one of them was going to have to find a way to live with what the other one had done. I cannot give back those years, Dorothea said. I know that. Nora looked at her mother-in-law, the woman who had sent Sylvie Marchand away with 2 months' wages and a reference letter, and the clean conscience of someone who has managed a problem efficiently. The woman who had sat across from Nora at 7 years of dinners. The woman who had married a man who in the end had been braver than she was, who had written a name on an envelope and left it in a drawer. No, Nora said. You can't. Dorothea opened her eyes. They were dry. She had too much practice for anything else. What would you like me to do, she said. Nora was quiet for a moment. The question was genuine, she could hear it. That was the strangest part. After 7 years of this woman managing her with the smooth efficiency of someone who managed everything. This was the first question Dorothea Kincaid had ever asked her that did not already have an answer arranged inside it. I want you to tell Graham, Nora said. Everything. Not a version of it. Everything. She looked at the box on the desk. He deserves to know that he had a brother who loved someone, that the someone was sent away, that she had a daughter who grew up in Gatineau not knowing she had a family here. Dorothea's chin lifted, slightly, by instinct. And I want you, Nora continued, to say her name. Dorothea looked at her. Sylvie Marchand, Nora said. My mother's name. In front of Graham. In front of Penelope, out loud, not as a problem your family handled. As a person who was treated unjustly and who deserved better. The study was very still. The lamp made a warm circle on the desk between them. Dorothea looked at the photograph of her son and the young woman sitting on the back steps, laughing, holding hands, not yet knowing what was coming. She looked at it for a long time, then she said very quietly, "Sylvie Marchand was a good person. Better than the situation my family put her in." She swallowed, "And I was wrong." Nora felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. She was honest enough to know it would take longer than a single evening in a study for forgiveness to be something real. But the shift was there. A door not opened but identified, made visible. She stood, she picked up the box and the photograph. Dorothea remained seated. She looked older suddenly than she had in the dining room, or perhaps simply her actual age, unpadded by the armor she usually wore into every room. "Are you going back out there?" Dorothea asked. "Yes. What will you tell them?" Nora looked at the study around her. Henry's chair, Henry's desk, the hidden panel and the empty shelf and the box that had been sitting there for 3 years waiting for her to find it. "The truth," she said. "All of it. However long it takes." She walked toward the door. At the threshold she paused. "You said Charles looked for her for 3 years," Nora said without turning around. "Behind her, Dorothea would have found her," Nora said, "if you hadn't been so careful." She walked back down the hall. Her heels were quieter this time. Or maybe the house was simply less terrifying than it had been an hour ago. The dining room door was still open, warm light falling out through it into the corridor. Graham was standing just inside the doorway. He had been waiting for her. His face had none of the careful neutrality left. It was just his face, open and a little lost. The face of a man who has just been handed a version of his own history he did not know existed. He looked at the box in her hands, then at her face. She walked to him. She put the box in his hands. "Your father wanted you to see these," she said. "I think he wanted you to understand who Charles was, who my mother was." She paused. Graham looked down at the box. Then, after a long moment, he looked up. "Is it true?" he asked, though she knew he already believed it. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He stood with the box for a moment. Then he put his arms around her, carefully, as though she might need careful handling, and she let him. Because after 7 years of careful handling administered as control, it was something entirely different to receive it from someone who was also, in this moment, finding his footing for the first time. Behind them, at the end of the hall, Dorothea Kincaid appeared in the doorway of the study. She walked toward the dining room. She sat back down at the table in her chair at the head of it, where Penelope was still waiting. And then, in a voice that Nora could just hear from the hallway, Dorothea Kincaid said a name she had not spoken aloud in 35 years. "Sylvie Marchand," she said. "There is something I should have told you all a very long time ago." The house, for the first time in 7 years, felt like a place where the truth had enough room to stand upright.